Okay, this is my grandpa, Harold Eldredge, and today is February 27th, 1993. Okay, I have questions for you. Where did your ancestors come from? Like,
your great-grandfather?
Yeah.
Well, my great-great-grandfather came from New England in the early 1840s. He joined the church there, and he took his family to Nauvoo. And when they left there, he had married a woman that had a child by a former marriage. She lost her first husband, and her name was Adelaide. And when they left, her parents, the parents of her former husband, would not let Adelaide come with them. So they left without her, and with the promise that she would be sent out later. But she never did come. And when the saints left Nauvoo to come to Salt Lake City, they were in one of the first companies. My great-great-grandfather, my grandfather was, my great-grandfather was just 6 years, no, it was my grandfather, it was my great-grandfather, my grandfather was just 6 years old when they came across the plains, arriving in Salt Lake Valley in September of 1847. You want more?
Okay, what kind of things did they do? Like,
well, when they arrived in Salt Lake Valley, you know, there was nothing here then, and they took the stream that come out of City Creek Canyon and used it to irrigate for irrigation purposes. And my great-grandfather was the water master, and it was his job to let people have the water in their turn. And when people would want water out that wasn't in their turn, he just wouldn't let them have it. He was a pretty hard-boiled man. And when they first divided up the city and gave them each family a 10-acre plot of ground, my great-grandfather had a plot of ground over there. It'd be on about 5th West and a little bit north of North Temple, in where the railroad yards are now. But he had a 10-acre piece of ground over there, and that's what they would till the ground, and he was the water master. And of course they all worked in the community projects, you know, like building roads and things of that sort.
Okay. Like what kind of traditions did they have in their family?
Well, all of my ancestors came here because of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They were all converts. My great-grandfather, the one that came from Massachusetts, the story is told in the family that when the ministers would come around and preach, that they were always welcome in my great-grandfather's home. And at one time, when they were there teaching the home, my great-grandfather said, my great-great-grandfather said, the true Church of Jesus Christ is not on the earth now, but it will be when this young man, referring to my great-grandfather, when this young man becomes an adult. So we're all LDS people, our whole family, both my father's and my mother's side.
Okay, what was like the cost of things? Like, how much did things cost?
Well, I don't know what it was in their time, but in our time, I can remember, we got married in 1938, and that was before World War II, and it was during the Depression. Had been on for several years. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been president, and he had started our nation on the road to socialism with a lot of his programs. A lot of people think he was a great man, but I think he was a villain. But anyway, things were very, very scarce. During that time, you could buy a loaf of bread for a nickel. You could buy a quart of milk for a dime. Bananas were 5 cents a pound.
A hamburger 15 cents a pound.
Hamburger was 15 cents a pound. And wages, when I first started work in 1938, my pay was 65 cents an hour. I was a letter carrier, a substitute letter carrier, and I worked 65 cents an hour when I worked, and if I didn't work, I didn't get any pay. Things were quite different from that now.
So, what did you do at your job?
What?
What did you do at your job?
Well, I was a letter carrier. Mm-hmm. And I worked as a substitute letter carrier for 6 years. And before I worked as a letter carrier, in fact, right after I got out of high school, I went to work for a man who owned a bicycle shop. His name was Fred Zimmerman. And I started to work for $6 a week. I worked 6 days a week for $1 a day. And when things improved, and I got $10 a week, I thought I was really getting there. Mm-hmm. But times have changed so much since then. When I first started, the top pay for a letter carrier was $2,100 a year for a regular letter carrier. And as I continued in the Postal Service, I delivered mail for over 20 years. Then I aspired to the supervisory work in the Postal Service and achieved that, and I was the superintendent of delivery and collection for all of the delivery services in the Salt Lake City Sectional Center, which covered everything from Orem to Roy, and from Wendover to Vernal. And that was, I had a real good job there, and I retired from my work there in January of 1972. But in the meantime, I started working for this man at the bicycle shop. And when I went to work for the post office, I had to leave him because my work at the post office was so unpredictable. As a substitute, I worked when there was work, and I didn't when there wasn't. And so after I got a regular job at the post office, where I just worked 40 hours a week, I went back to the man that had the bicycle shop, and he wanted me to come and work for him again. And in the meantime, his brother had become a partner with him. And so since I only worked 40 hours a week, I had extra time to work over there. Well, subsequently, the man that I originally worked for, he was transferred to California because he worked with United States Smelting and Refining. And so he sold his interest in the business to my brother and I. And of course, we just worked at the shop. My brother worked at the railroad, and we just worked at the shop when we weren't working on our regular jobs. Well, eventually, Fred's brother retired, and two of my brothers and I bought his interest. So the three of us conducted the business, and what we later called Eldredge's Bicycle and Lawnmower Shop, which we had for a number of years. The good thing about it is that all of my boys, all 7 of our boys, when they got out of school in the afternoon, they went to work. They didn't have time to horse around and get in trouble. But then we later sold that business. After I retired from the post office in '72, I worked full-time in the shop for about
9 years?
About nearly 10 years, and then we sold the business. Well, I wanted to tell you, when I worked at the post office, when you think of a letter carrier, you think of somebody walking, but most of my work as a letter carrier was on what they called city-mounted routes. And they were routes that you had a car, we drive our own car under contract and deliver the mail either to the door or to curbside boxes. And at that time, you talked about the price of things. I bought a new Ford in 1937 for $775. You want to know, how's that? What do you pay for a new Ford now? Well, the least you can get them is about $10,000.
Okay, tell me about your parents.
Well, my dad, his father was a polygamist, and he had 3 wives. And during the 1800s, the late 1800s, when polygamy was against the law, his mother's family, his mother moved their family to Logan. And they lived in Logan for quite a while. And then eventually they moved back to Salt Lake City after the manifesto was issued by President Wilford Woodruff. Or was it John Taylor? One of them anyway. And my dad worked in the Postal Service for 55 years, I think. He started out delivering mail out of one of those little horse-drawn mail carts, and then he eventually went into a clerk in the registry department in the post office, and then he became the foreman of the special delivery service in the Salt Lake post office. And when I turned 18, my dad brought an application home to take the civil service test for the post office, which I took, and that was during the Depression, and jobs were real scarce. When I took that test, there were 1,800 people taking it, and when I took the test, I was there were 2,100 taking it, and I was number 18 on the eligible list for a job. And I also took the test for the railway mail service, which we no longer have now. And when I took that test, one of my high school teachers was in the same room taking the test that I took there. But anyway, Dad, we lived on 13th South, just east of Liberty Park, as we grew up there. My dad always had a cow, and we had chickens and rabbits, and Dad always had a garden, and he was a hard worker. I remember we never did have an automobile, but in 1927, my dad bought a T-model Ford. And what a car that was. But road conditions were not like they are now, and cars are not like they are now. The wheels were big and the tires were hard. And one day when Dad was coming home from the post office in a snowstorm, it was snowing and there was snow on the roof of the car, and it was a touring car. If you know what that is, that's one that just has a top that folds back, and then you have side curtains on to keep the storm out.
No windows.
And It was snowing, and there was snow on the roof of the car. So Dad was coming up 13th South, and he reached out to brush some of the snow off the top of the ar, and he lost control of the car, and it went into the ditch that was there on 13th South by the ballpark and ran into a tree. So he knocked a couple of his teeth out, but he never drove a car after that. But us kids used to. They got the T-model out. It was the T-model car, and us kids used to get the T-model, push it out in the alley, and we'd take turns driving while the others pushed it up and down the alley. But later we actually learned to drive the T-model, and I used that when I was courting your grandma. But anyway, that's about my dad. And in my mother and dad's family there were 9 children, 6 boys and 3 girls. And I have an older sister and an older brother. And I grew up and went to the Emerson School, and then to Roosevelt Junior High that was over here near 9th South and 9th East. Emerson School is still there, but they have a new building now. And then it was just right after South High was started. I think South High opened up in 1932. And I went to South High in 1933 and 34. Of course, that is no longer a city high school. And it was there where, well, it was in our ward here where I met your mother, your grandmother. But we went to South High together. And that was a long, long time ago. Now, in my mother's family, her family immigrated from England, and they lived out there in the area where my grandfather Eldredge's family was. They lived on at 44 North 8th West, what it was called now. It's now 900 West. And actually we have records that my great-grandfather ordained my grandfather Emery to the priesthood, in the priesthood. So that was kind of an interesting twist. But all of my predecessors that came to Salt Lake Valley came here through the church. My grandmother Eldredge, or my father's mother, came here, and her name was Dunster. And they emigrated here early, and the first winter they lived in Salt Lake City. They just lived in a covered wagon box. They didn't have a house to live in. And she used to tell us some real stories of the hardships they had there. Later, her father moved out south on 9th East, south of 45th South, where he raised his family out there. As far as family traditions are concerned, we really didn't have many in my mother and father's family. Outside of Mother always used to invite all us kids home for my dad's birthday on the 19th of March. Of course, this is after we were all married. Mother was a great cook, and she made bread, and pies, and puddings. Of course, having cows and chickens and all that stuff. And we used to sell milk to our neighbors. And for 10 cents a quart, we'd deliver it to their porch. Fresh milk, raw milk, never pasteurized. I remember one time, my mother's home was still on at 825 East 13th South, and when the city put the alleyways in, Mother's home was in the way. So they put my mother and dad's home on the wheelbarrow, moved them east far enough to make the alleyway going up between 8th East and Windsor Street. And those were the days. And west of the alley was a kind of a store building, And running back for, maybe 150 feet, maybe 25 feet wide was the property that belonged to that house. And there was used to be a cigar factory in that building, and out in the back they had these sheds where they'd dry the tobacco. And they had some family that lived next door there taking care of the place, and one day the fire started out in those drying sheds, and it burned my dad's barn down too. Oh, what a fire that was. The boys that lived next door said it was just a little fire when it started. But then all my mother's brothers and my dad's family came one day, and they rebuilt that barn. Of course, it didn't have a high-pitched roof anymore. It just had a shed roof on it. But Dad had a cow for quite a few years after that. And I remember they used to drive cattle. You know that now they move cattle in trucks and trains, but they used to drive cattle. They'd come down 13th South when they were driving them downtown. I don't know where they come from or where they were going to, but at times when these cattle drivers would come down the streets weren't paved, and there were no curbs, there were just gutters there. And when these cattle drivers would come, the cow in our yard would just go crazy. And more than once she broke out and joined the crowd that was going down with the cattle drive, and then they had to rescue her after that. Dad always did have a cow, and those were the days. Yeah. I'm out of gas.